Deep in the heart of Ice Age Europe, 40,000 years before anyone would ever write these words down, a child is born inside a limestone cave, and the very air seems to be trying to kill him. Outside, the wind carries ice crystals sharp enough to cut skin, and the temperature has dropped so low that breath freezes into fog the moment it leaves the lungs. This child has no name yet, no way to know that scientists will one day call his kind Neanderthal, and no idea that the entire future of his species now rests on whether he survives the next few hours. His mother wraps him in cured animal hide, presses him against her chest for warmth, and prays to whatever gods her people believe in that the fire at the cave mouth does not go out before morning. Somewhere outside, a cave hyena is calling into the darkness, and everyone inside knows exactly what that sound means. Being born as a Neanderthal in this world means entering life already several steps behind in a race you did not choose to run. Your body is built like a fortress, thick-boned, barrel-chested, muscular in a way that modern humans would find almost frightening, engineered by evolution to survive brutal cold and to wrestle down animals many times your size. But that same body demands an enormous amount of fuel just to keep functioning, and in a world without agriculture, without stored grain, without any guarantee of tomorrow's meal, hunger is not an occasional visitor. It is a permanent resident. From the moment this child takes his first breath, his life will be measured in a brutal currency, calories in, calories burned, and the constant, exhausting effort of staying on the right side of that equation. The stakes could not be higher. If the hunters of his small band fail to bring down a mammoth, a woolly rhinoceros, or even a reindeer within the next several days, the group faces slow starvation through the remainder of the winter. There is no marketplace to buy food, no neighboring village to trade with, no safety net of any kind. Every single person in this tiny community, likely fewer than 20 individuals, is only as safe as the last successful hunt allows them to be. Injuries here are catastrophic in a way that is almost impossible for someone from the modern world to imagine. A broken leg while chasing prey across icy terrain does not mean a trip to a hospital. It often means death, because a Neanderthal who cannot walk cannot hunt, and a Neanderthal who cannot hunt becomes a mouth that the group can no longer afford to feed. Archaeological evidence tells us something remarkable, though. Some individuals survive devastating injuries for years, cared for by their kin long after they could contribute to the hunt. It suggests a species capable of loyalty and compassion, even while living on the absolute edge of extinction every single day. As the child grows, the challenges only multiply. By the time he can walk on his own, he is already being taught the deadly craft his people have refined over hundreds of thousands of years: how to grip a heavy thrusting spear, how to read the tracks of an aurochs in fresh snow, how to move silently enough to get within arm's reach of an animal that could crush him with a single kick. Neanderthal hunting was not the safe, distant activity that later humans would develop with bows and thrown weapons. It was close, brutal, and terrifyingly intimate. Skeletal remains from sites across Europe show injury patterns eerily similar to modern rodeo athletes, men whose job it is to get thrown, gored, and trampled by large, furious animals on a regular basis. This was simply what growing up meant for a Neanderthal boy. There was no childhood spent away from danger. Danger was the curriculum. His first real hunt comes earlier than most modern parents could ever stomach, somewhere around the age of 12 or 13, when the older men of the band finally allow him to carry a full-sized spear into the field rather than simply watching from a safe distance. The animal chosen for this initiation is deliberately smaller, a young red deer separated from its herd, but even a wounded deer can shatter a boy's ribs with a single desperate kick, and everyone knows it. He is told exactly one thing before the hunt begins: get close, strike hard, and do not hesitate, because hesitation is what gets people killed out here, not fear itself. When the moment finally comes, when the deer turns and he has one single heartbeat to decide whether to drive the spear home or step back, something in him simply refuses to fail. The kill is clumsy, the spear does not go in cleanly, and he is knocked to the frozen ground hard enough to leave bruises for weeks. But the deer is down, the band eats that night, and for the first time in his life, he understands exactly what his body and his mind were built for. Then, sometime in his early years, the world around him begins to change in ways his people cannot yet fully understand. Strange new faces begin appearing at the edges of their territory, tall, slender figures with different builds, different tools, and different ways of surviving the same brutal landscape. These are the anatomically modern humans, homo sapiens, migrating out of Africa and pushing steadily into the very lands the Neanderthals have called home for hundreds of thousands of years. At first, contact is rare and cautious, small bands eyeing each other from a distance across a frozen valley, each side unsure whether the strangers represent an opportunity, a threat, or something in between. But over the following decades, these encounters grow more frequent, and the pressure on already scarce resources grows with them. Two different kinds of humans, both hungry, both intelligent, both desperate to survive the same unforgiving winters, are now competing for the same limited herds of game. This is where the story rehooks into something far larger than one boy's survival. Genetic evidence tells us that despite the tension, despite the competition, Neanderthals and these new arrivals did not simply fight from a distance forever. They met. They mingled. Somewhere in this era, and in countless similar encounters across the continent, Neanderthal and Homo sapiens individuals interbred, leaving a genetic signature that still lives inside modern humans today, a small but real percentage of Neanderthal DNA carried by people all across Europe and Asia even now. It is one of the strangest twists in the entire human story. The very species that would eventually vanish left behind an invisible inheritance inside the species that replaced it. But interbreeding did not mean peace. It did not mean safety. If anything, it meant something more unsettling, an emotional entanglement layered on top of a competition for survival that neither side could afford to lose. Imagine standing at the edge of your own territory, watching a stranger who looks almost, but not quite, like you, and knowing that the coming winter will force your two peoples into either an uneasy truce or open conflict over the same dwindling herds. There was no framework, no precedent, no elder who could tell him how this was supposed to go, because nothing like it had ever happened to his people before. Every interaction was an experiment with potentially fatal consequences, and every one of those experiments has left a trace still detectable in human DNA tens of thousands of years later. As our Neanderthal grows into adulthood, the climate itself becomes his fiercest enemy. Ice Age Europe was never stable. It lurched between brutal cold snaps and brief, unpredictable warm spells, forcing prey animals to shift their migration routes without warning, sometimes disappearing from familiar hunting grounds entirely. A hunting band that had relied on a particular herd for generations might suddenly find that herd gone, driven elsewhere by a shift in vegetation or temperature that no one could have predicted. Adapting quickly enough to survive these shifts required constant movement, constant risk, and a level of physical endurance that pushed even these powerfully built humans to their absolute limits. Add to this the ever-present threat of cave lions, cave bears the size of small cars, and packs of wolves competing for the very same prey, and it becomes clear that every single day of a Neanderthal's adult life is a negotiation with death. The climax of this struggle arrives not as a single dramatic battle, but as something quieter and, in some ways, far more devastating, a season when everything goes wrong at once. A brutal early winter arrives weeks ahead of schedule. The herds that should have passed through familiar valleys do not come. Two members of the hunting band are injured chasing a wounded bison across ice-slicked rock, and one does not survive the fall. Food stores, already thin, dwindle toward nothing. In this moment, our Neanderthal, now a grown man with a family of his own depending on him, faces the single hardest decision of his life, whether to lead the remaining hunters on a desperate, dangerous push into unfamiliar territory where Homo sapiens bands have recently been spotted, risking violent confrontation, in the hope of finding untouched hunting grounds, or to stay put and watch his people slowly starve through a winter with no end in sight. There is no safe option. There has never been a safe option. There is only the choice that offers the smallest chance of survival against overwhelming odds, and he makes it, gathering his remaining able-bodied hunters and setting out across a frozen, hostile landscape with nothing but sharpened wooden spears and generations of accumulated knowledge standing between his family and oblivion. The journey itself becomes its own trial. Each night the group huddles inside makeshift windbreaks of piled stone and hide, listening to the ice crack across distant rivers and straining to identify every distant howl as either wolf, hyena, or something worse. Frostbite creeps into fingers that can no longer afford to lose their grip on a spear shaft. Food runs low enough that the youngest hunters begin chewing softened hide simply to trick their stomachs into quiet. And still, he pushes forward, because turning back now means arriving home too late to matter, and pressing onward means gambling everything on a stretch of land he has never walked before. What happens next reflects something the fossil record has quietly told us for decades. Neanderthals were not the shuffling, unintelligent brutes they were once portrayed as in outdated textbooks. They were resourceful. They controlled fire with total mastery, using it not just for warmth but for cooking, for hardening the tips of their spears, and likely for signaling across long distances. They created tools specifically adapted to local materials and conditions. They almost certainly had complex language, because coordinating a hunt against an aurochs weighing well over a ton, using only close-range spears, absolutely requires the ability to communicate a plan in advance and adjust it in real time. And they cared for their wounded, their sick, and their elderly in ways that suggest emotional bonds every bit as real as our own. This was never a story about a lesser species. It was a story about a different species, extraordinarily well adapted to an extraordinarily harsh world, doing everything right and still, ultimately, running out of time. Because here is the resolution that makes this story so quietly devastating: we already know how it ends. Somewhere between 40 and 45,000 years ago, the last Neanderthal populations vanish from the archaeological record. Not in a single catastrophic event, not in one final war against the newcomers, but through a slow, grinding erosion, shrinking population sizes, increasing isolation between small remaining bands, a changing climate that kept punishing already fragile groups, and relentless competition from a rapidly expanding Homo sapiens population that may have simply been slightly more efficient at extracting resources from the same unforgiving land. There was likely no single moment when the last Neanderthal understood that he was, in fact, the last. There was simply one winter, in one small band, somewhere in what is now Iberia or the edges of Western Europe, that never saw another spring bring a new generation. And yet, in a strange and quietly beautiful sense, they never fully disappeared. Every time a person of Eurasian descent today catches a cold more easily, or has slightly denser bone structure, or carries certain traits linked to skin and hair, there is a real chance that a fragment of that Ice Age inheritance is still quietly at work, a genetic echo of a species that once dominated an entire continent through nothing but strength, intelligence, fire, and an unbreakable will to survive one more brutal winter. Being born as a Neanderthal meant being born into one of the hardest lives a human species has ever faced. It also meant being born tough enough, adaptable enough, and connected enough to leave a mark on the very species that would eventually take their place.